Billionaire finds a girl and 3 babies fainted in a park. Takes them to his mansion. Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning run for billionaire Richard Langston. A routine he found solace in. The park near his mansion in Johannesburg was calm at this hour, with only the chirping of birds and the rustling of trees in the soft breeze. As he jogged along, lost in thought, something unusual caught his eye by the side of the path. At first, it looked like nothing more than a pile of discarded blankets. But then he saw them shift. His heart quickened. He slowed down, stepped closer, and what he found made his blood run cold. A young girl, perhaps 19, was sprawled across the bench, her body thin and frail, her clothes tattered, and her face pale and exhausted. Her eyes were closed, and she didn't stir as he approached. But beside her, wrapped in threadbare cloths, were 3 tiny babies, each crying softly, their little hands reaching out in search of comfort. Their fragile faces were streaked with tears, their small bodies trembling in the cold. Richard's mind raced. Should he call the police? Should he wait for help? But the babies' cries grew louder, and one of them coughed, a sound so weak it tugged at his heart. Without a second thought, he gently lifted the babies one by one, holding them close to his chest, before carefully scooping up the girl in his arms. She was too light, alarmingly so, and despite his efforts, she remained unconscious. Without hesitation, he rushed to his car, his pulse quickening. Strangers on the street stared as he passed. But Richard didn't care. He had no idea who they were or what had happened to them. But something deep inside told him that this was no coincidence. He drove fast, his hands trembling on the wheel, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The grand black gate of his mansion creaked open as his car pulled in. The house, as silent as always, stood stark against the morning sun. Inside, Nandi, his longtime housekeeper, was already preparing for her day. She saw Richard rushing up the driveway, carrying 3 babies in his arms and a young girl slung over his shoulder. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, what happened? Who are they?" she asked in shock. "There's no time to explain," Richard replied quickly, his voice firm but filled with worry. "Get warm water, blankets, and call the doctor now." Nandi blinked in confusion but did as he asked. She had never seen Richard act this way. As they laid the girl gently on the couch and the babies on a soft rug by the fireplace, the sounds of tiny breaths filled the room, signaling that their fight for survival had only just begun. The house, usually so quiet and pristine, felt different today. Richard moved swiftly, his mind racing, but his body strangely calm despite the urgency. Nandi, his housekeeper of over 15 years, had never seen him like this before. She could hear his rapid footsteps echo through the grand hallway, and when she saw him enter the living room, his face tight with worry, she knew something was terribly wrong. He was carrying the 3 babies, still crying softly in his arms, their fragile bodies barely clothed, wrapped in thin, makeshift blankets. The girl, barely breathing, was slumped over his shoulder, her pale skin almost translucent, as if life itself was slipping through her veins. Nandi froze in shock for a split second, then sprang into action. "Sir, what happened? Who are they?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and fear. "There's no time," Richard replied sharply, though his voice betrayed the storm of emotions churning inside. "Get blankets, warm water, and call the doctor immediately." Nandi's hands trembled as she rushed to comply. She had never seen Richard so unsettled, his usual composed demeanor shattered by the sight of the frail girl and the helpless babies. As she prepared what he'd asked for, her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Richard laid the girl gently on the plush couch, her skin so cold to the touch it made him flinch. The babies, barely more than skin and bones, were placed on a soft rug near the fire. Nandi quickly wrapped them in blankets, her heart breaking as she felt their tiny, cold bodies tremble beneath the fabric. She grabbed bottles of milk from the kitchen, her hands shaking as she fed the smallest baby, the one with dark eyes that looked up at her with trust despite the terror he'd surely known. His tiny hands gripped the bottle eagerly, sucking greedily as if the milk was the only thing tethering him to life. "They're starving," Nandi whispered softly, barely able to hold back her tears. Richard nodded solemnly, He gently cradled one of the babies in his arms, the warmth of his embrace a stark contrast to their fragile forms. "She was passed out when I found them in the park," Richard said softly, his eyes not leaving the babies. The babies were crying, cold, and scared. Nandi reached out and checked the girl's forehead, feeling the heat of fever radiating from her skin. "She hasn't eaten properly in days," she muttered, concern etched on her face. Richard stood in silence for a moment, watching the babies sleep, their chests rising and falling with each shallow breath. The girl, still unconscious, lay too still, too quiet. He had no answers, only an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "Make a room ready for her," Richard said to Nandi, his voice firm, though the weight of the moment hung heavy in his chest. "And one for the babies." Nandi hesitated, her eyes flickering with disbelief. "Are they staying here?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Richard didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, looking at the fragile girl as if he could somehow will her to wake up. "I don't know who they are," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "But they're safe now. That's all that matters." Nandi stared at him, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation. In all her years working for him, she had never seen Richard like this. He was a man of wealth, a man who ran his empire with precision and control. But today, he was nothing more than a man trying to hold on to his humanity in the face of tragedy. The mansion, once silent and empty, now hummed with the quiet sounds of life, the soft cries of the babies, the rustling of blankets, and the faint thump of Richard's heart, which seemed to beat just a little bit faster than usual. Amali's eyes fluttered open to a strange, unfamiliar world. At first, the softness of the bed and the clean scent of the sheets made her think she was still dreaming. But then the memories rushed back, her frantic search for the babies. The terror of not knowing where they were. Panic surged through her, and she sat up too quickly, her head spinning as dizziness overwhelmed her. "The babies," she gasped, her voice hoarse with fear. She looked around frantically, her heart racing. The room felt so foreign, too calm, too still. But then, her gaze landed on the crib across the room. There, nestled in clean clothes and soft blankets, were her three siblings, Buell, Lawand, and Anathi. They were sleeping peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in the rhythm of a deep, much-needed rest. Amali's breath caught in her throat. She bolted to her feet, her weak legs almost giving out from beneath her. But she didn't care. She rushed to the crib, her trembling hands reaching out to scoop the babies into her arms. First Buell, then Lawand, and finally Anathi, one by one. She held them close, hugging them to her chest as if afraid they might disappear. Tears streamed down her face as she rocked them gently, her body shaking with the weight of relief and fear all at once. "Where am I? Who brought us here?" she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Just as she whispered the words, the door opened slowly. Richard stood in the doorway, watching her quietly. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed concern. "You're safe," he said gently, his voice soft, almost comforting. "No one will harm you here." Amali recoiled slightly, holding the babies tighter as though she could protect them from the world itself. "Please don't take them from me," she begged, her voice breaking with desperation. "We didn't steal anything. We were just tired." Richard's expression softened. "No one is accusing you of anything," he said calmly, stepping further into the room. "I found you in the park, unconscious. The babies were crying, cold, and scared. I brought you here to help." Amali's eyes shifted from Richard to the babies in her arms. She felt a deep ache in her chest. But there was something else, something tentative. A glimmer of trust she didn't recognize but couldn't deny. Slowly, she sank to her knees, still holding her siblings close to her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want this. I just wanted them to live." Richard knelt down beside her, his eyes gentle. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're alive. You are too. That's what matters." Amali looked at him through blurry eyes, her heart raw from the pain she had been carrying for so long. She had never known a kindness like this. Not from strangers. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found a place where they could finally be safe. Richard sat in silence long after Amali had fallen asleep, his mind racing with the weight of everything he had learned. The room was quiet, The soft rise and fall of the baby's chest the only sound in the stillness. He had promised to help them, but something about the situation felt too personal, too familiar. As the night deepened, the thoughts that had been lingering in his mind began to piece together, slowly forming a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. The name Nomvula had echoed in his mind since the moment Amali had mentioned her mother. It was a name that stirred something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. It wasn't until he was alone in his study that he realized why. Nomvula, the woman who had once saved his daughter, Ayanda, from drowning at a company event years ago. He remembered it vividly, the poolside, the crowd, the slip, the fall. No one had seen it happen except Nomvula. Without a second thought, she had plunged into the water, fully clothed, and pulled his daughter from the depths. His heart ached as the memory flooded back. At the time, he had thanked her profusely, offered her a bonus, but time had faded the significance of that moment. It was just another fleeting exchange, or so he had thought. Now, here he was, staring at a photo of Nomvula that he had found in old employee records. The very same woman who had saved his child. She had given her life for Ayanda, and now, her daughter, Amali, had arrived at his doorstep, desperate and starving, with 3 helpless babies clinging to her. Richard's breath hitched as he stared at the photo. Nomvula's kind eyes, her soft smile. He remembered her face with perfect clarity. And now it haunted him. A deep, sorrowful recognition settled in his chest. This wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. It was fate, pulling him towards something he couldn't ignore. He knew he couldn't turn away from this. Nomvula had saved his daughter. Now, it was his turn to save hers. With a heavy heart, Richard stood up, holding the photograph close to his chest. A promise had been made, one that had lingered in the shadows for years. Nomvula, he whispered softly, you saved my child, and now, maybe it's time I save yours. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting soft golden light over the room where Amali sat with her siblings. Richard stood by the doorway, his gaze steady, but there was something different in the way he looked at her. He was no longer just the billionaire who had taken them in. He was someone who had made a choice, one that would change everything for all of them. Amali looked up at him, the weight of her exhaustion still heavy on her shoulders. Her eyes, though tired, held a glimmer of curiosity as she watched Richard step forward. His movements purposeful. He paused before her, his expression serious but kind, as if he had already made up his mind, and now he was sharing it with her. I want to help you, he said, his voice quiet, but firm. I've been thinking about it a lot. You've carried so much on your shoulders already. And you shouldn't have to carry it all alone anymore. Amali's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of hope and hesitation building inside her. I don't want to owe you anything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Richard smiled softly, but there was a sadness in his eyes. It's not about owing me. It's about what's best for you, and for the babies. He moved closer, his presence both comforting and reassuring. I've been thinking about this for a while now. You've been through so much, Amali, and I want to give you a chance to go back to school. A chance to dream again. I'll pay for your education. All of it. You won't have to worry about money. And I'll make sure the babies are cared for while you're studying. Her breath caught in her throat, her mind swirling with the enormity of what he was offering. Could she really accept this? Could she trust him? She glanced down at her hands, worn and scarred from a life of struggle, and then back at him, her heart torn between the pride that had kept her fighting alone and the deep, aching desire to give her siblings the life they deserved. Richard seemed to sense her hesitation, his gaze softening. I'm not asking you to trust me completely, Amali. I'm asking you to let me help. To give you a chance at a life you deserve. Amali's eyes filled with uncertainty. But why are you doing this for me? I'm just a stranger. Richard knelt down in front of her, his voice low and filled with emotion. You're not a stranger, he said, and if you remember, it was your mother who saved my daughter. It's my turn to help you now. This is my way of saying thank you. Amali's breath caught in her throat as the words sank in. For a moment, she said nothing, the weight of his offer pressing against her chest. She thought of her mother, Nomvula, and the sacrifices she had made. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to stop carrying the weight of the world alone. Nandi entered the room then, her presence a gentle reminder that they were all in this together. She set a tray of tea down beside Amali. Her voice filled with warmth. Amali, I know it's hard to accept help. I understand, but think about the future. Think about the babies. They need you to be strong for them. And the only way to do that is to take the opportunity that's right in front of you. Amali wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. But what if I can't do it? What if I fail? Nandi's hand gently rested on her shoulder, offering reassurance. You won't fail, she said, her voice steady and comforting. You have all of us now. You're not alone. Amali hesitated for a long moment, her heart torn between fear and hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. I'll try to go back to school. Richard's face broke into a smile, a mixture of pride and relief washing over him. You're making the right choice, he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. For the first time in a long while, Amali felt a spark of hope deep within her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could start over, build a new life, and give her siblings the future they deserved. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in something bigger than survival. She believed in a chance. A year had passed, and with it, everything had changed. Amali no longer recognized the girl she used to be. She walked through the halls of the university, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her head held high with a new sense of purpose. The weight that had once crushed her was gone, replaced by something lighter, brighter, hope. Her steps were no longer tentative, her gaze no longer filled with uncertainty. She had a future now. She had a life that was hers to shape. At home, the transformation was just as profound. The triplets, once fragile and silent, were now vibrant and full of life. Buell, Lawand, and Anathi were no longer the small, scared babies Richard had found in the park. They were healthy, laughing children, running through the mansion with boundless energy, their faces always lit with smiles. Richard had given them more than just a roof over their heads. He had given them the chance to thrive, to grow, to be children in the truest sense of the word. Nandi had become their second mother, a constant presence in their lives. She watched over them as they learned to walk, talk, and play, always with a gentle hand and a loving heart. Richard, too, had stepped into a role he had never imagined for himself, fatherhood. He was no longer just a billionaire, he was their father. And his life had taken on a new, unexpected meaning. He woke up each day with a smile, eager to spend time with the children, to watch them learn, to play with them in the garden, and to help them with their homework. But it wasn't just the triplets who had changed. Richard had changed, too. The man who had once been consumed by work, whose heart had been locked away behind walls of wealth and power, had found something he never thought he'd find again, a sense of purpose. He no longer measured his success by the size of his bank account or the number of zeros on his contracts. His true success lay in the laughter of the children, the joy of watching Amali grow, and the love that filled their home. Amali sat in the living room one evening, the soft glow of the setting sun casting a warm light on the room. The babies were playing on the floor, their tiny hands grasping at building blocks, their giggles filling the air. Amali looked at them, a smile tugging at her lips, and then turned her gaze to Richard, who was sitting nearby. "You're doing great," he said, his voice full of pride. Amali's heart swelled with gratitude. She hadn't expected this life, this sense of belonging, this peace. She hadn't expected to find herself, to find hope, to find family. She had thought that all she would ever have were the memories of struggle and loss. But now, she had something more. She had a future. She had love. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of it all. It was a quiet afternoon when Amali walked into the living room, holding a small piece of paper in her hands. The babies were napping in their crib, the soft rise and fall of their chests a peaceful reminder of how far they had come. Richard was sitting by the window, looking out at the garden, his gaze distant as he thought about the changes in their lives over the past year. He barely noticed Amali approaching until she stopped in front of him, her hands trembling slightly as she held out the paper. Richard looked up, his eyes softening as he saw the paper in her hands. For a moment, he didn't know what to expect. He had grown used to the small surprises that life had thrown his way, Amali's laughter, the joy of the triplets' first words. But this felt different. Amali's voice was quiet when she spoke. This is for you," she said, her words tentative, as though unsure of how he would react. Richard took the paper, unfolding it slowly, his breath catching in his chest as he saw the drawing. It was simple, a sketch that captured the innocence of childhood. The lines were uneven, the colors bold and erratic. But in the center was a figure, a man standing beside three small children. At the top of the page, written in childish handwriting, was a single word, Baba. His heart stopped as the word hit him like a wave. Baba, father. He stared at the drawing, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The babies, the triplets, had drawn him into their world, and now they were calling him father. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a deep stillness in the air. The sound of his own heartbeat echoed in his ears, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the fluttering of his emotions. He looked up from the drawing, meeting Amali's eyes. She stood before him, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her gaze. Bully drew it, Amali said softly. She doesn't really understand it yet, but she calls you Baba. She sees you as family. Richard's throat tightened as he fought to hold back the tears. For the first time in years, he felt something stir deep within him, something he hadn't realized he was missing: belonging. This wasn't just an act of charity anymore. It was something real, something far more profound than he had ever expected. As his hand gently traced the drawing, a promise formed in his chest, a vow to these children who had brought him back to life in a way he hadn't thought possible. Baba, he whispered, the word tasting foreign on his lips, but somehow right. He looked up at Amali, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I could be this person. But for them, for you, I'll be whatever they need me to be. Amali's eyes filled with tears as she watched Richard, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. She had never imagined a life like this, not after everything she had been through. But now, as she saw the man who had once been a stranger, now a father to her siblings, something shifted inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone. Richard looked back down at the drawing, his chest tightening with a mixture of love and something deeper, gratitude. You gave me a family, he said quietly, his voice breaking, and now, I get to give you one in return. For the first time in her life, Amali believed it. She believed in the future, in the family they were becoming together. She sat down beside Richard, the weight of the moment settling over them like a warm blanket. The world outside was still, but inside, everything had changed. This story teaches us that kindness, compassion, and selflessness can change lives in unexpected ways. Richard Langston's decision to help Amali and her siblings not only saved them but also helped him rediscover the importance of family and love. It shows that sometimes, the most profound connections come from the most unlikely places. And that offering help is not just about giving, it's about creating a future filled with hope and new possibilities. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to show your support. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Together, we can spread kindness and hope to the world.